not to use this, the schadenfreude of all of this is that it's like you unearthed a defiant people.
Yes.
Like you explain that here where we live is our country is actually like a defiant statement.
Exactly.
Can you explain like the central, that ethos?
When these Jews are saying here where I live is my country, they're saying, fuck you, here where I live is my country. I'm born here. My grandfather is born here. I am not a foreigner. I mean, there's a line that the Bund local committee has in 1901 where they say, we are not strangers here and we are not guests, even though the Russian government considers us as such. The land is soaked through with our blood, and we will stay and fight for that which belongs to us, our human, civil, and political rights.
Before we get started on today's show, please hit like and subscribe. Thank you so much for being here. Ahlan, ya Molly.
Shukran, ya Basha, shukran.
Ya Basha, I'm obsessed with the fact that, by the way, I found out that we both learned Arabic from Meha, from El-Kitab.
Oh, God. So which edition? Because there's an edition where she's like a blonde chick in her 20s, but then there's the older edition where she's a depressed brunette who's clearly 45, but who's pretending to be like an 18-year-old.
I don't know. This was like 20 years ago for me, but I remember her being really depressed. I feel like she was brunette. I think it was the brunette depression, and she'd have like these videos, right? Like they have like videos of her just like ruminating on things, and I'd be like, "Why do I relate to this?" Like I was like, and I was like, so I was like one of those people that grew up with parents speaking Arabic, but like answered them in English. So like college was this reclamation for that language for me. So like. It's just super funny that we both were like toiling in the books of El-Kitab. So you've been on a long book tour for Here Where We Live is Our Country. How has that been?
It's been amazing. I mean, I counted, as of last night, I've done 29 live events and God knows how many podcasts. And yeah, I don't think when someone decides that they're going to write a book about Yiddish socialism in 1930s Poland that they're necessarily counting on, speaking to like packed out rooms of hundreds of people.
It hit.
It totally hit.
Well, you've been speaking about how there are like hundreds of people at each event. You've spoken about like their reactions. What has it been like?
I mean, it's been amazing. So my audiences are really diverse. I'd say they're about half Jewish, half not Jewish. A lot of like very young people, a lot of very, very old people. I was always like, if I had two sort of archetypical Jewish readers, one of them is a hot 19-year-old girl wearing a t-shirt that says L'chaim Intifada and watermelon earrings. And then the other one is an 85-year-old Jewish lesbian who has been on the front lines of fighting the cops for the last 6 decades.
And I heard in some of your interviews that some of them are like, you've given me my ancestors back. Like what has been that kind of reaction like for you? Or could you go into that?
Oh my God, it's been so moving. I mean, first of all, there are so many young Jewish people in America who have rejected Zionism because it's a psycho death cult. But they had this traditional sort of like Hebrew school education that doesn't teach you anything about or God knows, anti-Zionist Jewish history. And so when they reject Zionism, they have like this real hole in themselves. And they're like, fuck, like, where am I from? Like, do I have any ancestors I can be proud of? Like, what is this? And so just knowing that they actually come from a really amazing lineage of people, who fought for solidarity, who fought for human liberation. It's doing a real number, healing people. And then also, for a lot of these older people, imagine these people have, for decades upon decades, they've been told that they're not really Jewish, that they're traitors, that they're capos, that they're marginal. And they've been, fighting on the front lines of like every single good fight in America, all of that time, and really being shat on in a lot of ways by the mainstream community. And so for them to see this lineage reclaimed, which is often the lineage of their literal parents, is really moving. Like my friend Marv Zuckerman, he's 94 years old. He comes from a Bundist family. His dad was imprisoned in Poland as a Bundist. And, his whole life he's been teaching Yiddish at community college. And, he's been like a Bernie bro. He's been, a socialist, an anti-Zionist. And this has been something really obscure that he's devoted his life to. And I had my LA launch with Hannah Einbinder and 250 Silver Lake hipsters. And I had Marv sing the Bund's anthem, Die Shvua, in Yiddish. And he was crying. He was crying.
Oh, I bet it gives so many people permission to sort of go in the direction that they might have, moralistically or just, I don't know, commonsensically know is the right way to go. And now it's like you're reclaiming this entire lineage, and you're like, oh wait, I know where all of my feelings come from. They're like truly grounded in reality. Like I have permission to feel this way. I feel like I would feel that way if I feel like reading your book almost makes me feel that way. And I'm Lebanese Muslim. You know what I mean? Like,
well, I mean, I feel like one of the things I wanted to do with the book was I wanted to take the Bund out of the box of, Jewish studies, because I feel like sometimes Jewish subjects, right, they're like in this like little box when they're, here for these types of people. And I mean, for me, like the Bund is part of the history of the world left. And I consider them the ancestors of everyone who's a leftist and everyone who's a radical, whether you're Lebanese, whether you're from Costa Rica, whether you're from Indonesia. I feel like there's a shared leftist socialist history that we are all a part of. And the Bundists themselves, they saw themselves as that. They were internationalists. And so in thinking about how I did events and thinking about my interlocutors and just in thinking about how I wrote the book, I very much wanted to put them into the world.
Has there been bad backlash from Zionists? Like, what is your social media like? What has all of that been like?
Oh, man. First of all, I want to say that one of the things that makes Zionists different from the last group of people I really pissed off, which was fanboys of Bashar al-Assad, is that, the fanboys of Bashar al-Assad, they'll come to your events alone and they will scream in your face. They have a lot of chutzpah, a lot of courage, right? Whereas what Zionists do is they write a lot of letters to your venues and they try to get stuff canceled. But in general, I've only had like one guy show up at my event to yell in my face. And in general, there are people, of course, who disagree with me, who don't like this point or that point, but that's normal, right? Like if you put your thoughts out in the world, you should expect to have people disagree with you. That's fine. But in terms of like people just like screaming unhingedly at me, it's only been one dude in Portland. But my social media is special. It is a special thing right now. So the first line of attack that Zionists always do is they start by laughing at the Bundists for dying in the Holocaust. And I mean this quite literally. I mean, posting comments like, LOL, the Bundists all got gassed. I bet you think you're going to be the last one in the gas chambers.
Oh gosh, that's so dark.
It's really dark. I laugh about it right now because you have to have a gallows humor about it, but it's sick. I mean, there's one that really upset me. Someone took a photo of Jewish men being herded towards a gas chamber, like a photo, for a death camp. And he wrote on top, "This is my Uncle Moishe at a Bund meeting. I bet he got a merit badge for solidarity."
Oh, what a fucked up thing to say. What a fucked up thing to post in general. Like, how dark is that? Do you feel bad about it? Like, or do you think they're insane and like, you're like, I don't care?
These people are genocide supporters, right? These are supporters of the genocide in Gaza. So in a lot of ways, given that they're supporting a current genocide, it makes a certain sort of sense to me that they are mocking the victims of a previous genocide, even though those victims might be their very ancestors. But on the other hand, it's sick, right? Like this is a psychological sickness. And then they try all sorts of other stratagems. One thing that was really funny was for a while they were posting my nudes from when I was 20 and when I was a suicide girl. Yeah, I know. I'm 42 now, and it's.
You're like, thank you for bringing up.
Yeah. I was like, man, damn, I was cute. Some of the eyebrow choices I think maybe needed to have been rethought. There are some eyebrow pencil regrets. Yeah, exactly. But besides some eyebrow pencil things, I stand by them.
You're like, I love them. Thank you for bringing them out.
Yeah.
Before all of this, you actually visited Palestine. How did going to Palestine bring all of it together?
I think that before I went to Palestine the first time in 2015, when I went as a guest of Palestine Festival for Literature, and when I stayed afterwards to report for Vice from Gaza. Before that, I knew that my great-grandfather was in the Bund. I thought it was like a really cool family curiosity, like that he was he was called an underground group where he became a revolutionist. But I had a very unclear idea of what that meant. I, just assumed it was some cool lefty radical anti-Tsarist thing. And I went to Gaza. I saw Shujaiya, which was like just vindictively destroyed in so many ways. And, I had been over the border into Syria before that.
Sure.
I had seen like Azaz, and I'd also seen bomb sites, from Assad. So it's not like I'd never seen a city that had been bombed before, but it was just like, it was bombed and then fucking shelled. And then it was
I think that in some interview or somewhere you said it looked like someone had brought a giant eraser from the sky to erase like Shujaiye, which is where I think you were in Gaza.
Yeah, like this vindictive, like this sadist's eraser trying to just like erase life, and then seeing people rebuilding with hand tools, like straightening rebar, like reclaiming rebar from bombed buildings with hand tools, and just seeing how like cool and funny people were, sarcastic, the commitment people in Gaza had to joy, to making beautiful things and hard in brutal circumstances. I was like so disgusted with Israel. I was just like, what the fuck is this, man? This is horrific. And when I was there, Israel shelled a little bit, not like how they were, doing mass murder sprees of 2,000 people every 2 years, as was their tradition, but just, they would routinely bomb and shell Gaza in between their big mass murder sprees. So I was there when they did that. And yeah, just like the claustrophobia of the drones, the fucking gunships. It's like the cage, right? The cage. And so I was just like so disgusted and horrified, and I'm horrified also by the state ideology of a state that's doing this, which is Zionism. And so I came back and I was doing something that I do to unwind, some real nerd shit, which is I get drunk and look at Wikipedia and read it aloud to my boyfriend. Yes. Sorry if this is
beautiful. That's like literally a great Saturday.
Yeah. Relatable content. And I was reading about the Bund, and that night, for some reason, I realized like two things. The first was that the Bund had been there for every major event of the first half of the 20th century in Europe, from the Russian Revolution to the Holocaust. And the second was that it was an anti-Zionist group. And the thing that hit me was I was like, probably the reason that we don't know about this group that's, again, been there for all of these major events is because they're an anti-Zionist group. And right. So I got kind of obsessed, right? I think what I found out was, first of all, that they had been involved in, they were one of the groups that founded the Russian Social Democratic Party, which, this is nerd shit, but that's the party that becomes the Mensheviks and the Bolsheviks and becomes the Communist right. Party of the Soviet Union. So basically they founded the group that shaped the entire course of the 20th century, right? They were some of the founders of that. I found out that they helped lead the Warsaw Ghetto Revolt. I found out that they, educated shtetls, giving young Jews access not just to like this very traditional memorization oriented religious education, but also like the entire world of knowledge, of secular literature, of science, of learning about the history of, countries that were far away, all of that. I learned that there were feminists, such as feminists were at that time, that right. They were revolutionaries, that they fought on the barricades of the revolution of 1917, that brought down the Tsar. And I learned that by the end of the 1930s, they were the most popular Jewish party in Poland, like at the ballot box. Like they won right. more votes than any other Jewish party in Poland. And so all of this, I was like, this is amazing. This is an amazing group. And also I learned that they were anti-Zionist, and avowedly so. And so I just got obsessed, and I ordered all of these books while still drunk. The scholarly books on the Bund. I think this is some relatable content, right? And I just like started like digging into it. And I also spent more time with my great grandfather's archive, looking through like not just his paintings, but his like autobiographical writings, his stories, where he has this line. He's like, I was involved in strikes and sabotage, even a shooting, and he just doesn't elaborate, And I read memoirs in English of people like the Warsaw Bundist head of their self-defense group, this like scar-face bruiser named Bernard Goldstein. And then I wrote an article about the Bund for the New York Review of Books that was based on my sort of obsessive year of research. And it was the most popular thing I've ever done in my life still. And I've written many, many, many articles, but this is my top. Maybe this one and my article about being a naked model. Maybe those two. And now my haters are bringing the worlds together.
A perfect storm, really.
Exactly. So I wrote this article, and all of these young Jewish people wrote me saying that they had never even known their ancestors fought back against the Nazis, right? And how much it meant to them. But also older people wrote to me, like this amazing lesbian poet, Irena Klepfich, whose father, Michael Klepfich, was the head bomb maker in the Warsaw Ghetto.
Wow.
Yeah, just like these amazing people. And I got to know them.
Wow.
Exactly. And they shared their memories with me. And I was just like, this is sacred, right? Like I can't just, drop this with one article. I can't be like a fuckboy, like, like journalists we usually are, I was like, no, this is, we're gonna get married, man.
Not intellectual fuckboys.
We are fuckboys. We're just like, baby. I want to hear, me and you, baby, in your tenants union. And then like, a year later, I try not to be a fuckboy as a journalist too, but we are. But then also I had the chance to study Yiddish. Yiddish is the language of the Eastern European Jewish working class. It's a language still spoken by Hasids today, but largely is wiped out in the Holocaust and later by American assimilation and Israeli hostility. But this language was the language the Bund wrote in. And so I spent 2 summers studying Yiddish at this very intensive program.
This is like a 7-year entire journey, right?
Yeah.
Like this, So you started learning Yiddish 2 summers in a row?
Yeah, 2 summers in a row, 6 weeks, 20 hours a week, just very stern teachers. They're like, And then once I knew Yiddish, I was able to read all of the Bundist sources, right? Like all of the biographical dictionaries, these memoirs. I was able to read like underground newspapers that, were printed by hand in the Warsaw Ghetto, like all of this stuff. And I just got obsessed. And also I didn't, just read, right? I went to Ukraine during the war. I went to Poland twice. I went to Latvia. I went to Lithuania. I interviewed all these amazing old people. I read all of these like memoirs, not just of like the Bund's friends, but also people that fucking hated them. I wanted like a full picture. I read all these amazing women's memoirs, and I just spent like 7 years in the most obsessive, like deranged sort of research hole that it was like, it's like hiding from the world in this, Yeah,
it's like a hyperfixation that really, really actually is important.
Exactly. It's not just like my usual weird hyperfixations. So my whole Jewish family, they're just all these kind of impecunious bohemians would be how I would call it, good with art, bad with money. And this owes everything to my great grandfather. He was a post-impressionist painter. He was a bohemian. He was also what he called at the time a moral vegetarian who felt that people were so violent to each other because they were so violent to animals. This is really like a belief that he held very strongly to. In the Depression, he had an egg farm and he refused to kill the male chicks because that would be violence. Yeah. And instead his wife had to physically separate 1,000 roosters from each other so that so they wouldn't kill each other, while he, wrote about the morality of vegetarianism. And he was just like a character, right? Like he had what he called the Rothbard Home Museum of Direct Art, which was just him putting all his paintings on his lawn, every morning so that people could see him. Wow. Yeah, he's pacifist. He would go to socialist meetings. He didn't believe in formal education. He was like, anything you want to know, you could teach yourself from a book, which is kind of like me too, actually.
I believe that. You're like,
and so, yeah, and my great aunt, who I knew well when I was growing up, her house that she lived in was his house. And so it was filled with his paintings. Like every single surface had paintings or sculptures or writings or glass mosaics. I mean, he was broke a lot of his life. And so when he couldn't afford paints, he would just collect beer bottles from the trash and he would smash them and he would make mosaics out of them. Or he would collect wood from the trash and he would sculpt it into these things. And so I grew up feeling like I really knew him, and he had this body of work that he called memory paintings. And these were just all about Volkovisk, which was this small, pretty poor town in the Pale of Settlement in the Tsarist Empire and back in Tsarist Russia. And they were amazing because it wasn't like this sentimentalized Fiddler on the Roof thing where everyone is these pious, noble people. He was such a bad boy. He had all these things of him teaching other kids to smoke in school, or so in traditional religious school, Jewish school that he grew up in. It was a lot like what people think of as like a traditional madrasa, like, because you would learn Hebrew, but not necessarily even how to read Hebrew at first, just how to sound out Hebrew so that you could like beautifully recite a Hebrew text that you may not even know what it said, you know? And, this was like enforced by like a stern older man that's like me, like it's like beating your ass in his pictures.
Yeah.
And so,
and you're just trying to learn. You don't even need to know what
yeah, exactly. It doesn't matter, right? You have to just recite. And so that's, how his early education was too. And he just rebelled against it. He has a picture where he's drawing caricatures of his teacher in the religious books. He has like ones where he's like lighting his teacher's beard on fire when the teacher is falling asleep.
Like
he was a total icon. I love this kid. My favorite was he had one where it was like him and the other little boys are trying to impress the like 7-year-old girls by staging a circus show where they're like eating fire and on tight ropes. But then he like shows like the parents about to catch them and beat their asses for it.
Yeah, what a privilege to have all of this like gold mine of memories and just like insight into who he was.
The best. No, I feel so lucky because so many people have no idea who their great grandparents are. And I think especially in a lot of Jewish families that came to America, Europe had so much trauma, right? It had so much pain. Yeah. People just never talked about what they came from. Like I have people coming to me all the time and they're like, I want to learn about my family. And I'm like, well, do you know what town they came from, in Ukraine or whatever? And they don't. They don't know even the name of the town, right? And so I feel so lucky to know so much about this world that he came from, because that's not something at all should be taken for granted in families like mine.
Especially at that time, Jews were like crushing poverty, long-term conscription, pogroms, propaganda. And I think what you have access to is what is natural too, which is that in between things, there is joy and there is interesting life going on, and there are a child's thoughts and our teen's art, you know what I mean? And life being captured that way is important because even in the context of a lot of horror, people are just people. People are being people.
Exactly. With all of the complexity and mess and good and bad that is. I mean, I think about like Mohammed El-Kurd's book, Imperfect Victims, right? Where he talks about like how fucking dehumanizing it is that like every time a Palestinian is victimized by Israeli violence, they either have to be like a perfect child or like a mute saint or something. And it's like people just aren't, they're not like that, right? And I think, in terms of sometimes how Jews conceive of our own history, we have our own like perfect victims, complex where if we show a victim of the Holocaust, it's going to be like Anne Frank, who is, like not only a beautiful child, but also like a beautiful soul and like who wrote this genius diary. And she's from like a totally secular family that's from like Germany. It's not, a poor family from Poland. And she's perfect, in a lot of ways. And I think, one of the things like I really tried to do, in my book was I tried to show that people are human, right? With, the silliness and mess and bullshit and glory also, and courage that implies, and that they're not just these like cardboard saints or victims.
Absolutely. While you were doing all of this, what characters did you feel closest? Who are people that you just like wanted to bring to life?
Well, I had two. So the first was my crush, and it's pretty obvious he's my crush, which is the scar-faced bruiser Bernard Goldstein, who ran the Warsaw Self-Defense Militia. He's like my hottie character. But my character that I personally felt closest to is Sofia Dubnova. And Sofia is my friend's grandma, also my friend Mark Ehrlich's grandma. But she was a avant-garde Russian poet, part of what was called the Silver Age, which was the the pre-revolutionary artistic milieu of St. Petersburg before World War I. And it was an astonishingly like artistically fertile, decadent, beautiful time with all of these geniuses like Anna Akhmatova, Alexander Blok. She was a minor poet in that milieu. But she's also revolutionary, right? She incited military mutinies. She would smuggle pamphlets taped to her body like they were a pregnant belly. She would hide fugitives in her bedroom, right? Like she was someone who was very acquainted with like the danger and struggle of revolutionary life, but she was also someone who had the sort of decadent and romantic and artistic sensibilities that are so common to artists. And also she had the sense of humor and skepticism that were so common to artists. Like in her book, she talks about like how she's these pompous revolutionary dude comrades who are like chiding her for reading Nietzsche and stuff. They're like, Nietzsche, too decadent. You can't be a good revolutionary. And I also feel like she's quite queer in the book. This is my own reading, not supported by scholarship, but like the way that she writes about like the bodies of her female friends that she's sleeping next to is very different from how she characterizes her relationships with men, which tend to be characterized in a much more distant and comradely way.
I think also a part of it that was super interesting was the fact that you went to all of these places, and some of these places, even the avenues and the roads, like they don't exist anymore. But I think in one interview you said just to breathe the air of the same places was meaningful. Can you explain what it was like to be traveling and learning all of this at the same time?
It's always a head trip, right? If you're Jewish, to go to Eastern Europe. I mean, the Holocaust, obviously it happened over all of Europe, but in Eastern Europe, in a lot of these places, we were the majority, or at least we were a substantial percentage of the population. Like Jews were about a third of Warsaw, Bialystok, that's near where my great grandmother was from. We were 60% of the population. And so, I mean, these cities, even without the physical destruction that the Nazis did, I mean, these were fundamentally ethnically cleansed cities, right? And, you know, at this point, like the Jewish population of Poland, I think it's like 7,000 people. It was 3.3 million before the war. So, you know, these are countries that like fundamentally like just changed. There was the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising, during which the Nazis burned the whole Jewish neighborhood of Warsaw. But in 1944, there was what's called the Warsaw Citywide Uprising, which is when the Polish population did a massive uprising against the Nazis, hoping for help from the Red Army, which was across the river. And the Red Army decided not to help them and just to wait while the rebellion was crushed. But after the rebellion was crushed, as an act of vindictiveness and punishment, the Nazis they bulldozed Warsaw. They rubbled Warsaw. And Warsaw was one of the most beautiful cities in Europe. They called it the Paris of the East. It just destroyed, like the giant eraser that I was talking about, that's what they did. The historical core of Warsaw was meticulously rebuilt by Poles who, again, they weren't part of the Marshall Plan, right? Like so you could imagine the sacrifice it took to like raise the money to rebuild, like, you know, stuff from like, you know, the 1600s, right? Meticulously, like perfectly rebuilt, you know, using like Canaletto drawings and old photographs. I think it's a UNESCO World Heritage Site. So that was rebuilt, but they didn't rebuild a single Jewish thing.
Right.
And so, and then they just laid often new grids over those streets. And so, of Jewish Warsaw, there's the old cemetery. There's like a bit of the Warsaw ghetto wall. There's one synagogue that remains. And other than that, like there's almost nothing. Like it was just, I mean, in Warsaw itself, like it was just, you know, like, and then rebuilt on top of it. So there was a sociologist in the ghetto called Emanuel Ringelblum, who he created a rigorous academic sociology of the ghetto that was done by himself and other imprisoned academics. And they hid it in these giant metal milk crates. And on top of where one of those milk crates was buried, like the Chinese embassy is on top of that right now, you know. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So it's like you get an idea of like this is gone. Like this world, it has been rebuilt.
It's fully replaced.
It's fully replaced. Like that's one sort of just like really like just like tripping your head. But then the other thing that happens in other places is that it's exactly as it was, and except there's no Jews in it. So like Krakow is like this, right? Or Lviv, a beautiful city, like one of my favorite cities in Ukraine. It was 35% Jewish before World War II, right? Before the Jews were murdered. And so it's like, these are beautiful historical cities that, you know, and I had never even thought of this part of the world as beautiful. I had such a stupid, biased American Jewish, you know, view that it was all like ash and death. And I went to these places. I'm like, these are so fucking beautiful. Right. But it's like the people are gone. And I had a line in my book where I was like, it's like we have been so effectively, you know, taken from this place that we exist in commemorative plaques now. I mean, when I was in Jaffa, there was like a similar sort of like vertigo, right? Because there's all of these beautiful, like gorgeous, like Palestinian mansions, right, that are now like restaurants and Israeli-owned restaurants and hotels and stuff, and you're just like, where are the people? Where are the people?
They like fully erased. They erased the reality and rebuilt it and created it into something absolutely fake.
Exactly. And it's just really, I mean, I was in a very bad mental state when I was in, especially like Lithuania and Latvia. I was calling my boyfriend Fred, having freakouts all the time, and he's just like, chill, and I'm like, no, horrors of history. Yeah,
and in my body, like I'm literally energetically like a vehicle of all of this pain.
And he's just like, these people are perfectly nice to you. What the hell, like chill, it's fine, and like horrors of history, man.
Not to use this, the Schadenfreude of all of this is that it's like you unearthed a defiant people.
Yes.
Like you explain that here where we live is our country is actually like a defiant statement.
Exactly.
Can you explain like the central, that ethos?
Absolutely. So when the Bundists were saying here where we live is our country, that was not like me saying that about New York. Like New York is real. I mean, it's hard to live in because the rents are high, but it's easy to live in because it's fucking awesome, right? It's not like a very brave statement, me saying that.
Yeah.
No, these were incredibly racist places. They were legally racist and they were freelance racist. These were bigoted ass places with a ton of violence that were poor, that were politically repressive to everyone, not just to Jewish people, but specifically like had the boot on the face of Jewish people. And these were also places where significant chunks of the powers that be believed that Jews were swarthy Oriental foreigners that ought to get the fuck out of Europe because they were like poisoning the body politic of, European Christian purity. And so when these Jews are saying here where I live is my country, they're saying, fuck you, here where I live is my country. I'm born here. Yeah. My father, my grandfather is born here. I am not a foreigner. I mean, there's a line that the Bund local committee has in 1901 where they say, we are not strangers here and we are not guests, even though the Russian government considers us as such. The land is soaked through with our blood, and we will stay and fight for that which belongs to us, our human, civil, and political rights. And, when I hear this, I think about like Paul Robeson, right? The great Black, intellectual, revolutionary musician, performer, when he was called to the House of Un-American Activities Committee. And he's like, I am not a foreigner in America. I'm not a foreigner. This land, this is soaked through with our blood. My father, my grandfather, my people built this country, and we are not foreigners, and we will not be treated like we are foreigners here. And both Robeson and the Bund were saying this with full acknowledgement of how racist these societies were, right? And that defiant insistence that this is our land and we will fight for this to be our land, and not just to be like tolerated, right? Like you tolerate a Bunyan, but to have like free, equal, beautiful lives here to flourish as we ought to, because it's ours. I mean, that to me is something huge. And I wrote an article for Funambulist where I compare it to the Palestinian concept of samud, right? Of the steadfast determination to stay on your land despite all of the predations of the Israeli state and all of its violence and horror.
Yeah, it's like the definition of being like, I'm not leaving my home, motherfucker. Like I'm born and raised here. This is where I am. No matter how much you make this hell, it's still mine.
Exactly. There's a review that this guy did of my book that I really loved where he said the Bund's anti-Zionism could actually be seen as a philosophy of anti-eviction.
I see. Let's move into that. Like, so you were looking at rallies and newspapers, and in these archives, the Bund renounced and also opposed Zionism.
Yeah. So there's like sort of two distinct periods of their opposition to Zionism, and those are before the Balfour Declaration and after the Balfour Declaration. Before the Balfour Declaration, in large part, they just thought it was batshit insane. They're like, you're going to have millions of people become collective farmers, something they've never done in their life, in the Levant on land you purchased from the Sultan.
They're just like literally looking at it and being like, this seems like a psychotic plan.
Yeah.
Like this doesn't, you can't.
Yeah, exactly. Like you're going to do this and you're going to lose weight for summer and you're going to do a pull-up finally and all of this is all going to happen, right? You're going to be great, dudes. And they were like, they thought it was so cracked out batshit that they were like, this is a plan by our rich bosses so that they can pay us starvation wages here and then say, oh, I'm a good guy. I endowed a yeshiva in Palestine. They thought this was a way of like rich Jewish people charity washing,
Sure.
while, like treating their workers like shit, something that capitalists have always done. But another thing was they were like, this is also submission to the racist logic of Europe that says that we're foreigners here and that we are a perpetual other that can't live alongside other people. And they saw it really as submission to bigotry. And they saw from the start how Zionists always worked with anti-Semites in Europe, like whether it was Theodor Herzl meeting with a notoriously anti-Semitic Tsarist minister, or whether it was the deals that David Ben-Gurion and Zev Jabotinsky, two major Zionist leaders, would cut with this like poisonously anti-Semitic Polish government. I mean, there's a line where Henrik Ehrlich, who's the Bund's leader in 1938, he writes, Zionism has always been the Siamese twin of anti-Semitism. And it's because it's the same logic, right? But after Balfour, there's another reason, which is that Balfour is Zionism tying itself up with the British Empire. And the Bund were anti-imperialists, and they were socialists, and they believed in human equality, and that includes equality for Palestinians. And so they knew that Zionism meant, from its earliest days, the evictions of Palestinian farmers, because it was built from the earliest days on buying land from absentee landlords and then brutally evicting, with the help of the British occupation, these Palestinian farmers who had lived on that land and worked it for hundreds of years, but who, because of like Ottoman land reform, had kind of gotten dicked out of their the official title by rich local elites. And so they had like a correspondent in Palestine who was reporting on land evictions and who was reporting about how his name was Josef Brumberg. He was doing that in the 1920s. They had isn't that amazing, right? And they also were reporting about how the Histadrut, which was a Jewish-only labor union, was like physically protesting to try to kick Palestinians out of the urban jobs that they were getting after they were evicted out of their land, because they were trying to create like a Jewish-only labor market. And they were looking at this and they were like, this is like the Polish unions trying to kick us out of our jobs in Warsaw, right?
Yeah, we see the connections here, and it's not looking cute at all.
Exactly. And they're like, we believe in human equality. And it wasn't like because they, idealized Palestinians who thought they were, perfect people. They didn't think anyone was perfect people,
Right.
but they were like, these practices you're depriving people of their homes and of their livelihood and of their ability to even work to make a living. And that is what's happening to us here in Poland. And this is some fucking bullshit, and we don't approve. And, you really see this after the Palestine riots in 1929. So in 1929, protests break out in Palestine that in Hebron and Safed devolve into really brutal riots where, dozens of Jews are killed, including Jews who are like very long-standing members of the Sephardic community who've lived there like hundreds of years and are not Zionists, right? It's brutal intercommunal shit. And basically the whole Jewish world goes into mourning for this internationally, but it quickly morphs into these calls for like just violent, bloody vengeance, like to like take over Al-Aqsa, to, kick people out of Jerusalem. It just, as so often happens, violence is used as a pretext for more chauvinism and nationalism and bullshit, right?
And more violence.
Exactly. Yeah. And the Bund refuses to participate. And the reason they refuse to participate isn't because they, think that these riots were great. It isn't that they think that the, victims didn't deserve to be mourned. It's that they're like, these riots were precipitated by Zionism, collaborating with the British occupation in order to strip Palestinians of all their political rights and of their land. And so they've laid the ultimate blame on Zionism. And they didn't just do this in like a journal article somewhere. They held a 3,000 person rally at Splendid Theater in Warsaw under the banner of Liquidate Zionism, where they said that it was the duty of conscious Jewish workers to fight what they called the storm of nationalism and chauvinism that Zionists were unleashing on the Jewish street. And they said, they have a line that's amazing where they're like, the answer to more tragically but pointlessly spilled blood, it can't be in more nationalism, right? It has to be in socialism and internationalism. And they went on a lecture tour about this. They sent a delegate to America they published pamphlets. Yeah, exactly. They were not, and in return, as you'd imagine, like Zionist institutions were fucking furious about this. David Ben-Gurion published an open letter in Heint, which was the biggest Yiddish daily in Warsaw. It was a Zionist daily, where he calls them like filthy collaborators of, the people who did the riots. And, Zionist groups lead a campaign to try to defund the Bund school system over this, claiming that they're making young Jews into, quote, enemies of Zion.
Is this kind of the same concept of the negation of the diaspora in Zionist history? Like, did it morph into Zionists just smearing the Bund as like weak, or is that a parallel?
I mean, the negation of the diaspora, that's just the idea that like every single diaspora community sucks and should stop living in the diaspora and go to Israel. That's what it is. And, you know, whether you're in like Samarkand or Cairo or Warsaw or New York, like y'all suck, your language sucks, your culture sucks, go to Israel. You have no future, you know, living in any of your homes. And the negation of the diaspora is something the Bund talks a lot about. And they just loathe it. And especially, I mean, the Jewish community in Palestine at this point is far smaller than the Jewish community in Warsaw. Like right. Vladimir Medem, this Bundist leader, he has a line where he's like, why are they asking us to spend all of our scant resources on a community that could, quote, be accommodated by a Warsaw poorhouse?
Yeah, right. God. Why do you think Zionism became the mainstream narrative for Jewish history? Like, Zionists are kind of infected with the same type of energy as fascists are. So why did it become the mainstream narrative, you think?
So I think that there are a number of conditions that let like really violent supremacist ideologies flourish. And one of them is a complete betrayal of humanity's better principles by people who ought to have had the power to do something. And so there's a few reasons, right, Zionism was able to sort of take hegemony. One of them is that 2/3 of European Jews were murdered, right? And so just like the complete like fucking annihilation, right, of like one of the I think it was 1 out of 3 Jews in the entire world was killed in the Holocaust.
It's like collective trauma is the soil with which, you know, fascism can...
Exactly. But also not even just that, like the Bund, because they were Polish Jews, 90% of Polish Jews were murdered, right? I mean, the Bund, they were murdered. I mean, that's like, you know, they just the dead can't speak back, you know? Yeah,
the sheer numbers of erasure.
Exactly. But then I think the other thing is that the Western world, as we know, they have always paid a lot of, you know, lip service to like freedom and democracy and human rights and the rights of minorities. And we all know exactly the hypocrisy with which they have treated those sorts of grand proclamations. And so the Western world, throughout the entirety of, you know, the rise of Hitler and World War II and the aftermath, especially, and I want to say America, but not exclusively America. I blame Brazil, I blame Argentina, I blame Australia, you know, I blame Canada, which took 3,000 refugees only. They refused to take Jewish refugees. They refused to take Jewish refugees from Hitler. They refused to do basic things that could have saved refugees during the war. They refused to take Jewish refugees after the war, right? And I think that when you have just like the wholesale murder and trauma and decimation of an entire society and social fabric, right? Like, you know, of people like they're the only surviving people in their family, you know, they really like just that complete clear cutting of everything. And then you have the part of the world that gives lip service to the idea of like democracy and freedom and, you know, the free world and everything that's just like refusing to take you. And you have people just rotting in camps, right, for years. I mean, the refugee camps in Europe didn't close until the 50s, you know, and these camps were shit, man. Like one of them was in Bergen-Belsen, the former concentration camp.
Oh,
and
God.
You just have people like rotting there and they're just like applying for visas. Like, is it any wonder that people get radicalized by a fucked up ideology? I mean, I think if we look at all sorts of communities in the same situation, you can see how supremacist, violent, fucked up ideologies that promise people dignity and redemption through violence find a fertile ground amongst desperate refugees rotting in camps.
Yeah, absolutely. It's almost like you've unearthed this leftist, anti-Zionist, Jewish beginning. And in doing that, there is such a resistance to the idea that Zionism is the only way to be a Jewish person in the world. Have you noticed a shift in Jewish people's politics surrounding Israel? Like, obviously, we all have, but in your tour, like in how you're speaking to people, as a person who's just sort of looking on the outside into your community, are people becoming more anti-Zionist now? Like, can we hope?
They are. I mean, I think all of us, like everyone talks a lot about young Jews, right? Like I don't, need to spell about how young Jews have become a lot more anti-Zionist. It's like we've covered it in the media. But one thing I've been seeing is amongst older Jewish people, right? And these are people, who have like profound emotional attachments that are, difficult. They're difficult psychologically to overcome, and yet they're overcoming them. And I mean, I remember an older man in London, he told me, he was like, your book was the final nail on the coffin of my Zionism.
Oh,
and it's like, I wish the genocide was the final nail on the coffin of your Zionism. I wish, many things were, right? The thing that my book does for a lot of people is it's like people see, if you have fucking eyes, right? You see the absolute horror of what Israel is inflicting on not just Gaza, right, but on like South Lebanon, on the parts of Syria that they're stealing, on the West Bank where these like KKK style lynch mobs are just murdering people on sprees. If you have eyes, you fucking see that, right? But I think that the thing that my book does is it also shows people a dignified heritage that they can be proud of, and they can be like, this is mine. This fucking KKK style shit, it is not mine, and I reject it completely.
One thing you said that has stuck with me is that, and I'm not sure where I heard it, but you said something along the lines of like, even with all the forces of erasure, there are some legacies that are too strong to erase, like bodies rot, but ideas remain, and they resurface like buried gold. I was so moved by that idea. Like, what do you hope this work contributes to the revolution that we're in right now?
I hope it inspires people to be brave. I hope it inspires people to build a political world that is based not just on marches and fighting, even though marches and fighting are important, but is also based on sociality, that's based on love, that is based on friendship, that is based on building like a thick, rich, gorgeous social life, whether that's sports clubs or choirs or dances or all of the things that people need, right? The roses, as well as the bread. I hope it inspires the left to take power seriously, because we really fucking need to. What happens when we don't take power seriously is our enemies win, and then they throw us out of helicopters like Stephen Miller is fantasizing about.
God.
And I hope it also, it's a dark thing, but it's a hopeful thing. I think a lot of times people, they look at Jews and they're like, how could Jews have gone through this genocide and then a Jewish state be inflicting a genocide, right? How could they? And the thing that I believe is people's victimhood does not ennoble them, right? There are no people who are noble by nature or noble by virtue of what they suffered. People are just the same fucked up, flawed, infuriating, evil, good, heroic people, right? And I hope that we can move to a politics that recognizes all of our capacity to be perpetrators and victims and heroes too, because I think that there's nothing else we can build on.
I really appreciate you so much for being here. This has been so fascinating, and I really, really hope everybody reads your book.
Thank you so much, Afeef. I'm honored to be here.